Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast, is for anyone interested in leadership and the wins, losses, and lessons of being an executive. We are two women who have successfully navigated C-Suite roles and are sharing our experiences. We will be bringing on guests to tell their stories and want to spark honest conversation and discussion, which may include swearing and lots of laughs. Join us on this adventure.
Welcome to another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We have such a great guest today. I really can't wait. Well, I mean, they're all great, to be honest. But Beth Cobert, who I'll introduce more fully in a few minutes, she will be a real treat for us to speak to and for you to hear from. But before we introduce Beth, I want to first say hello to Juliet. Hi, Juliet.
Hey, Susan. How are you?
I'm good. It's once again Monday. We tend to do our recordings on Monday.
Yep.
And I've been thinking a lot lately, as you know, because I've seen you very recently in person, thinking a lot about physical and mental clutter. And I saw a post the other day on Instagram that gave me something to think about. And it's a fellow coach colleague who said, I think it's important what we call what we're doing, whereas decluttering emphasizes the clutter. And she said, instead of thinking about losing or letting go of things, to really think about releasing things. And first of all, being a word lover, I really thought, okay, that's interesting. That sparked something different for me. And I thought to myself, well, there's a lot of things I need to release. But it gave me a really different feeling, this opportunity to let go of stuff, release things in a way that felt easier, that felt lighter. So I wanted to share that with you and see what that brought up.
I think you know that I've been working a lot just in my life, in personal, professional, is on the detachment and the loving detachment, I guess you call it, where you can just stop stressing about it and stop holding on to things so tightly and just letting things be, letting things evolve. And also when you're talking about releasing, it feels like a gift.
Yeah.
It feels like you're sending it on its way to wherever it's going to land next. And hopefully, if it's a physical thing, someone else can use it. I had a garage sale about a month ago, and that felt good. It felt like somebody really liked the things that I was ready to release. So I like that. Yeah. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I have an assignment this week. My husband's out of town and I've got some homework to do. So I'm going to be releasing this week.
I can't wait to hear about it.
On that note, it's time to invite our guest, Beth Cobert, to our conversation. And it's my privilege to give a little background to this incredible woman. She's blushing, I know that, but let me tell you about her. Beth Cobert recently completed her tenure as president of the Markle Foundation. In this role, Beth led Markle's work to expand access to quality jobs and create a more equitable labor market through initiatives including the Rework America Alliance, Rework America State Network, and Skillful. She helped create these strong national coalitions of government, business, education, and training, and nonprofit stakeholders focused on transforming our country's approach to skills development and access to career opportunities. This is really important work you were doing, Beth. These efforts culminated in the recent transition of the Alliance to Jobs for the Future, where the Alliance's catalytic efforts and influence will continue to grow. But wait, there's more. Prior to joining Markle, Beth honed her leadership skills as acting director of the Office of Personnel Management under President Obama. During her tenure, OPM, which serves as the Chief Human Resources Agency and Personnel Policy Manager for the federal government, adopted new technology to improve customer service and cybersecurity, and championed innovations to support a talented and diverse workforce. Beth came to the OPM from the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, where she was appointed by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate, which we all know is, well, we'll probably have to ask you a question about that, to serve as Deputy Director for Management and the U.S. Chief Performance Officer beginning in October 2013. At OMB, she led the President's management agenda, an effort to make government more effective and efficient so it can deliver better, faster, and smarter services to citizens and businesses. Beth began her career at McKinsey Company, where she became a senior partner and worked with clients across a range of sectors, including financial services, healthcare, real estate, telecommunications, and philanthropy. I believe she was a managing director of one of their big offices. It won't surprise you to know that throughout her career, she has served on boards of directors and trustees, bringing her leadership and commitment to better outcomes for all to volunteer activities. Both Juliet and I met Beth when Beth was chair of the United Way Bay Area, and I was a fellow board member, and Juliet was a CFO. Welcome, Beth. I'm so glad you're here on Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast.
It's great to be here with both of you.
Very exciting to have you.
Yeah, it's really nice to see you again. I know that our listeners are on audio only, but we have the really fun occasion to see her in person in front of us on the Zoom.
Yeah.
So Beth, let's start with, I don't know if it's a softball question, but it's probably one you would expect. What was it like to go from a large private organization where you had senior management responsibilities into the complex gonculator of the federal government?
Moving from my job in consulting, which I'd done for a very long period of time, to the federal government, where I'd never worked, was an incredible experience. I remember vividly showing up on day one. You have to go through a lot of security. My office was in the old executive office building. So I had an office that was had been Ulysses S. Grant's office when he was Secretary of War. It's very large, very high ceilings, great view right across the little road to the White House. So amazing view, amazing presence. And you feel immediately this weight of like, oh my gosh, like this is the country here. You've got a flag in your office. You've got a picture of the president and the vice president. And what you're doing is you're there to serve. And that involves all sorts of things. First of all, it involved a whole set of things that I'd never done before. So people came in on the first day and they bought me this big pile of papers and said, we need you to clear these reports. And I said, great. And then I said, what do you mean clear these? Like, what does that even mean? And they said, well, you have to sort of read them and sign them. And I'm like, but there's like a really tall pile of papers and you need these in 10 minutes. And like, I can't do that. Like, what am I supposed to do? So turns out, in fact, when you sign things, you are responsible for what's in them. So you've got to figure out how you're going to get through that. But that was just one example of like, this is a new world. But my time in the federal government was literally the most amazing professional experience of my life. It is an enormous opportunity to have impact at a scale that is just unimaginable because everything you do affects millions and millions of people. And you're working with a set of folks, again, you have to remember there's roughly 2 million federal civil servants and about 6,000 of them are political appointees. So everybody else is there as a civil servant. And they come to work every day thinking about their job and what they're going to do to fulfill this mission. And so things like, the flag in your office means something. And having the honor guard, we never had a meeting of like more than 300, 400 people. Like the honor guard would come in and that's how you'd kick off the meeting. Susan, you might have seen this when you were at the Fed, right? And that stuff really resonates and it becomes very personal. And so it was an incredible scope of things. It was for me also just professionally, a whole new learning experience. Besides learning how to clear documents, I had all sorts of things I was responsible for that I didn't know anything about and had to learn really fast and rely on the incredible career civil servants largely who were working for me and actually were incredible experts.
Yeah. And those folks, they tend to work no matter what the administration is, right? The civil servants, so...
I will make a pitch because you're giving me the platform here. The importance of an independent, nonpartisan civil service is vital to this country. You say the oath when you take the office, they do as well. And their job is to carry out the wishes of the administration according to the law, whether they agree with those or not. That's their job. That's what they do. And so they might like it. They might not like it. But if Congress has passed the law, the administration has signed that law into action, their job is to execute as sort of democracy has intended. So having that independent civil service is really important. And remember, most jobs in the government aren't political. They're like making sure you get your Social Security check or making sure, the grants from the National Institutes of Health make it to hospitals that are doing cutting edge research, or that veterans get benefits. That's what most of the people are working on every day.
Right. Supporting all the things that some of us don't even think about requiring support, right? Stuff doesn't happen by accident. So Beth, I have 17,000 questions, but I'll start with the next one that came up for me, which is you've had different jobs, even within McKinsey. And when you get a new job, like any good executive, you say, I'm going to have a 90-day plan. This is how I'm going to learn, how I'm going to get to know the people, how I'm going to develop what I like to call depth perception, right? You get a job, everything's either on fire or everything is not important, and you have to figure out which things are which, as you say, in that short period of time. Clearing reports, I'm signing them, I better have read them, right? So if you can, take us back to where you were sitting and what you thought you needed and wanted to do in those first 90 days. What bubbled up to the top?
So I'd say in all the jobs I've started, it always starts with listening. Again, I am a sort of eternal optimist. And I also believe that, people come to work every day trying to do a good job, and they possess a lot of knowledge. So I started by listening. In the case of my job at the Office of Management and Budget, my listening tour was me actually going to visit every agency to meet with sort of the senior operational teams there. And that was pretty unusual because usually you make people come to the White House, you don't go visit them. People thought this was kind of odd, but I was like, no, I want to actually go here. I want to hear from more people. So if I go there, I can meet more people. So, I trekked up to Baltimore to the Social Security Administration. It was not a trip that many senior administration officials make, let's put it that way. But it was really important for me to listen and to really, again, there's sort of the listening tour that some folks do. You actually really have to listen, right? And you have to think at the end of every one of those conversations. What am I taking away about the situation? What am I taking away about that person and what motivates them? And how can I help them accomplish their goals? Because if I do that, then they're going to help me accomplish my goals. So the listening part is the first thing. I'd say the second piece is really trying to get through and use analogies. I have been a consultant for a very, very long time. And one of the things you have to do as a consultant is you're often thrown into something new and you've got to find a way to get oriented fast. Yeah. And so there's probably an analogy that you could find at almost any new thing I'd taken on at that point. So I really tried to rely on analogies. That's a very helpful way for me to think about, what's the same about this? What's different about this? That's another one. And the last, I did violate, everybody tells you at the end of the 90 days, you have to have your top 3 things. I never had my top 3 things. I probably had a top 10 things because I could never quite get it down to 3. I'm just not that disciplined. But I did have a sense of what were the most important things and how did they create momentum for the things I knew I wanted to get to? How did they create wins for people? Because you had to win over people. How did they create some wins for the organization? Because when you create those wins, you have the opportunity to challenge things later. But I never could get it down to 3, despite reading that in every piece of management advice that existed. So I sort of prioritized 10.
Yeah. Well, how many of us actually really only say we're going to try to accomplish 3 things in any given day, which is, that's sort of boilerplate good advice. But, we're hungry, we're ambitious, we have aspirations to move and change things. So I want to go back to what you described as your decision to go out to every agency. And what struck me was knowing how that probably yielded huge political capital with a lowercase p. The difference between saying to someone, give me your top 3 leaders and come see me and brief me, and physically going to the agency must have bought you huge goodwill.
I think it did, but that really wasn't my motivation, right? I really do believe that the people doing the work in whatever organizations I've been part of, is the people really doing the work. That's the part that's hardest for you to see as a senior leader, right? You get filtered from it. You don't have that many opportunities. And so the closer I could get to the work, the better off I was going to be. And I did that in government, my work at Markle with our amazing partners in the Rework America Alliance, right? The people at Unidos US knew so much more about the challenges facing the communities that they were serving than I ever could even hope to begin to understand. So if I didn't go to them and listen to them, or our partners at the National Urban League, or the business associations we were working with, like, they knew better than I ever could. So I had to find a way to tap into that. And I think if you do that, you get a lot back, and you do get points for doing it.
Right. And I guess I wasn't trying to diminish the depth of the move. It's just that when you do that, you're sending a signal about how you lead. And you lead with people first by showing up on their terms rather than on your terms.
And I think it's also understanding the work, because I think one of the things that a lot of leaders that I've experienced have come in and they stay at that high level and they never understand the actual work that's being done. And I've worked in a lot of organizations where the frontline workers are doing the real work. That's what I see it as. And not being seen and not feeling seen by senior leadership just causes all kinds of problems. And the disconnect there, it can be devastating to the organization, because people don't feel like they're part of a team. And I think the more you can get close to the work and understand the work that's being done and be able to, know a person's name, know their job. You don't have to know every detail of it, but if they feel seen and heard, it makes a huge difference. So I think that's really powerful, especially in government, where that's not probably a practice that most people do.
Government in many cases can be very hierarchical, right? It's again, get to scale. These agencies are really, really big. And so you need some form of hierarchy. You have a high preponderance of former military folks who are amazing, but are used to a certain level of hierarchy. And so you've got to find a way to break through, whether that's, going on those listening tours, whether it's, walking myself downstairs to the OPM cafeteria to get my lunch, as opposed to having somebody get it for me, because then I can meet all these people, right? And they would say hello to the director and acting director. And, those are the kinds of things where you build the relationships that give you credibility that, gets spread around.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask just one more thing about the process of getting that job, because I think we're all a little bit interested in your Senate confirmation. Do you mind giving us a little bit of background on that and how that felt? Because that's something that a lot of people have not experienced.
So I will tell you the story of two different Senate confirmation hearings. I had two. My confirmation hearing to be the Deputy Director for Management of the Office of Management and Budget was in the fall of 2013. The Democrats controlled the Senate, and things were a little more collegial than they are today. Mm-hmm. I was nominated, and partly in this role, through a phenomenal woman named Sylvia Burwell, who at that time was the director of OMB, went on to become the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and had a deep experience in Washington and philanthropy. And everybody loves Sylvia because she is an amazingly competent person. If you read her confirmation hearing, it's a love fest of the right and the left. So I got to come in with that. But I also happened to have my first confirmation hearing during the 2013 government shutdown.
Oh, Lord.
Confirmation hearings are an essential service of the executive branch, and so they are allowed to proceed. And for those of you who are government nerds, you will recall that that shutdown was really put in place by the House and Ted Cruz. So most of the Senate was mad about it. So if you go to a government hearing during a shutdown, most of the staff isn't there. So it was largely a handful of senators whose staff had left them with a few questions, but not a lot. And they certainly couldn't do the follow-up because they weren't in the room. And so my first hearing was incredibly easy and was filled with lots of questions about, you have this cushy private sector job. Do you really want to come here? What are you doing? And then I was confirmed actually very quickly, a few days later, as part of the sort of as an addendum to, there was a package of people who came through as they passed the budget that allowed the government to continue to work. So that was hearing number one. It was great. My second confirmation hearing was when I was, after I went to OPM, which was to deal with this massive cybersecurity problem. I was nominated as director. So my confirmation hearing was mostly lots of questions about what was I going to do about the fact that, the security clearance information on 22 million Americans was now stolen, and how could that happen? And so it was a lot more complicated process, as well as getting hung up in a bunch of partisan wrangling. So I ultimately never did get confirmed, despite being unanimously voted out of committee. So,
and yet you get to do the job anyway. It
was a little bit complicated, but because I was a Senate confirmed person, I could take that role over, and they never actually voted on it. There's a lot of complicated Federal Vacancy Act rules that I don't think anyone listening to this podcast wants to learn. But I could act as, because I was a confirmed person, I could be the acting director, because I had been nominated, my nomination was still in abeyance. So, yeah.
Right. And you'd already jumped over one pretty important hurdle, and in a way that's the theory. That's the important thing. On that note, I'm popping in for a quick word. Hi, Susan here, and I'm really excited to share that I'm offering a group coaching program starting this October. The Meant for More Mastermind is a 4-month online group coaching program for senior leaders and executives age 45 plus who want, more for themselves from their roles, their careers, their lives. A mastermind, in case you're not familiar, is a type of group coaching experience which also emphasizes your connection to peers, senior leaders and executives who get it and who know what it's like to be in your shoes. The Meant for More Mastermind creates a dedicated space and opportunity for you and your peers to get individualized support and executive life coaching while you connect with each other so you can all grow and take action and be more of who you want to be at this time in your career. Isn't it time for you to feel successful on your terms and to be in charge of your authentic leadership? So if you're a senior leader or executive who knows or suspects that there's room for you to grow, I'd love for you to explore this opportunity. You can find a link to the program in the show notes, and I'd love to speak with you directly. So please reach out via the email in the show notes. And now back to the podcast episode in progress.
Yep.
So do you mind going back and telling us a little bit about what you actually did to manage that cybersecurity situation? Part of what you talked about, or what I inferred from your bio, is you were involved in massive change initiatives, which involve so many things that all of us know about, like having a plan, having a vision, and then making all the people everywhere know how to follow it. Tell us about that.
So I'll describe sort of going to OPM and dealing with the throes of cyber hell. This was a massive breach. At the time, it was probably the largest breach in the history of the federal government, and it had happened. It had happened a number of years earlier. It had gone on for a while, and so in my role at OMB, I was very much involved because the federal chief information officer reported to me. So federal IT sort of reports up that way. And when this happened, you honestly, in some ways, get to see government at its best. It was an all hands on deck. We have a crisis. We need to solve this. And so we had the cyber experts in the Department of Homeland Security, the people from the Department of Defense, every multi-3-letter agency that does classified work in a room trying to figure out what had happened. And it took a long time to figure out what had happened. That was part of the problem. So we finally figured out actually sort of what had happened and roughly how many people it had happened to. And then the head of OPM stepped down. This had happened on her watch. And while she was not responsible for it, it had happened on her watch and she took ownership. So I got moved over there to try and deal with this. And we were trying to do sort of three or four things at once. One was we had to make sure we knew all that had gone wrong. Two, we had to make sure that there was a set of actions that would prevent any further things from happening, because you need to get people's security clearances to have the government work. So you had to figure out how you could do that. You had to figure out what you were going to do to provide information and remediation to the people whose data had been stolen. You had to rebuild the core systems. And then, by the way, you had to keep all the other things that the agency was doing running, because federal employees still need health care. Their health plan, federal retirees still need to get paid. Agencies need policy for how to hire people. There's like a whole nother agenda. So there was like, how do we keep that moving? So for the first part, the things you did were, one, you did have the opportunity to get sort of all hands on deck. And so it was amazing how people came together. I was able to pull together both a team of people in the agency and the interagency that were working on this as one at real speed. And we did that with, we had this like the morning 15-minute stand-up and the afternoon 15-minute stand-up. I had an amazing person working for me who had this color-coded list of to-dos. I think we used every color you could find in the Excel template because we had that many categories of items. So we had to do that. So that's sort of how we did it. We had this, very clear order of attack, who was responsible for which things. And it was very much a need to prioritize what was urgent, what wasn't. There was a big communication effort because you had a lot of angry people who knew that their data had been stolen and they didn't know what that meant. When this happened in 2015, breaches didn't happen quite with the frequency they do today. So it was a little bit of a new experience for people. Yeah. And we had equally annoyed every member of Congress, both Republican and Democrat, because all of their data was gone too, right? It wasn't just yours. So it was personal. Yeah. And so there was like, how did we get the right communications, and we had a very clear principle that whatever we were going to be communicating and all the actions we were taking, there was nothing, we were going to take the time we needed to do it right and to make sure that the actions we took didn't put any more things at risk than having information about everyone in America with a security clearance already gone to a source from China. So, it was a mess. And then the last piece was, how did you keep the rest of the agency moving? And so you tried to divide those up. And then the latter part, I basically relied on the incredible team that was there, largely the career staff that we talked about earlier, who you had to empower them to get stuff done. And, they were good. And so I didn't nor did I need to micromanage that stuff. I had to trust that these people were going to do the right thing with enough structure around it. But they knew what their job was, and you just had to let them go, because you couldn't do all those things and testify before Congress, who was sort of mad at you already. So that was right. Part of your day.
Wow. What a learning experience.
Yeah.
What an adventure in so many ways.
What did you take away from that you took to your next life? And, you went and led a large foundation after that, but the learnings there, and did your management style change in that, just from having that experience?
I think I got much more disciplined about, what's a good to-do list and how do you manage it. I learned that in what feels like a crisis, there's a number of things you need to do. Well, one is when everybody's telling you that you have to decide right away, the answer is not to decide. The answer is you should always take 10 minutes if you can. There's very few situations where you can't take 10 minutes or maybe a little longer. It's not to try and delay things, but that pause is really important. One of the other lessons I took away is, especially if you're in the midst of something moving fast and everybody's sort of rushing to consensus, there's a really important role to step back and to say to somebody, okay, your job is to argue we should do the opposite, that we shouldn't do the way we're going. Because you want to move fast, you want to be decisive, and you tend to get blinders. And it's hard to be the voice that is like, whoa, wait. And so assigning someone that role was something we did a lot in terms of gaming things out. What if we didn't do that? What's the alternative? And while it didn't always change our course of action completely, it did change how we communicated. It did change some nuance of it. It did make us, maybe we don't need to do that piece yet. And so that asking for someone to disagree is a really important lesson, because as a leader, you guys have seen this too. Once you express an opinion, people often want to agree with you. And you just were throwing the first thing that came into your head, right?
Right.
Well, that's what we've been kind of like how we got started in this podcast and this topic was everybody's doing something for the first time. We're all in situations where we actually don't know what we're doing, but we have enough experience to, get close enough. But I think in that situation, the pressure to make that decision and be the person that decides in the room is so great. But the value of getting all of the information first sounds like, you're going to get a better answer and you're going to get a clear direction by just making sure you've got all the information and all the input from the people who are around you. So that's a great lesson. Great lesson.
Beth, my next question is kind of a combo question. I'm stealing one from Juliet. And that's really, and one of the things I'm fascinated by about leadership is that we can be, as Brene Brown would say, in the arena. But at some point, you get some sleep. At some point, it's time to eat. At some point, it's time to let go of the workday. And I'm wondering how you did that in this time of intense work. Like, how did you manage Beth in that scenario?
It's a great question. So one, I worked incredibly hard. I'm just not going to make any pretense around that. It was really demanding. And in the case, not just of this, but some of the other things, there are real, people's lives are at stake. Things that are important matter. So you do just have an enormous amount of work. For me, there's a couple things. I am someone who, I need my exercise. I need my coffee. Those are the two, probably. And I need to be enjoying the people I'm working with. I think those are the three things that give me energy. So there's lots of good coffee. There was lots of Diet Coke, way too much Diet Coke. That was one thing. I do, if I don't work out, I get cranky. My gym in Washington closed at 10. So my goal was to leave the office so I could go to the gym and work out before it closed at 10. Because I started my day early in the morning. So
before the gym opened, presumably.
No, the gym was open, but it's Washington in the summer. If you go to the gym in the morning, it takes forever to cool off before you can actually go to work. And so, and I'm probably more of a night owl than I am totally more of a night owl than a morning person. So, so it wasn't the West Coast where you have to start your workday so early that you might as well just get up and work out. So, so I did that, and I had, was working with an incredible set of people who shared career and political, I'll say that again, this passion for making a difference, and, took their oath of office seriously. And so we found time to have fun. I had an incredibly understanding husband who happened to be in Denver. We were actually commuting. So he was starting a business in Colorado. I was in Washington. So if I worked late, no one was, I wasn't missing dinner. Right. So, but it's those kinds of things that give me energy. And then you got to do fun things. So, it's good.
Yeah. But it's interesting to really, to know yourself so well. And I think certainly as leaders are growing into themselves over time, you learn what it is that sets your day on the right course. And Juliet and I laugh about how we're both early morning exercisers and how important that has become. It's always been true for me. So it's just interesting, I think, to kind of get behind the hard work, the leadership, the intention. There's another question, and this is Juliet's question. So did you want to ask it, Juliet, about...
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. It's about, you must have had a safe person or persons to debrief and go to with your problems. So the first question is like, what's the hierarchy? Did you have a boss you could go to and say, this feels like a tough thing, let's talk about it?
So I'll describe OMB first, because that was more normal, right? Sylvia Burwell was my boss. She was the director. She, again, I can't say enough good things about Sylvia. And the leadership team there was Sylvia. There's a director on the budget side, guy named Brian Deese. And our general counsel were just an amazing group of people. I had a phenomenal chief of staff. First one person, then a second person. And then there were a set of people in roles in the White House who you interacted with a lot. But it was sort of that core group that really kept it together. At OPM, when I went there, you're sort of out of the executive office of the president bubble. So it was me. It was the person who took my OMB job was a very good colleague and a good friend, and we were sort of doing this together with one other person. We knew we'd broken the back of this problem when I didn't have to go to that meeting twice a day. But it was that there was that group, sort of one of the people was part of the chief of staff's office at the White House. And so that was the group who you really had to trust and be your, and again, some of these things you could only talk about to certain people anyway, but you could do that. So, and even when crisis had passed, like, that was sort of my core group of my go-to, right?
Yeah.
And then I built a team at OPM, right? I had a phenomenal chief of staff. I had a fantastic general counsel. We brought in a fantastic person from the private sector who was a cybersecurity expert, because I wasn't. So we built at a comms person, a ledge person. I built a whole new team. They were great.
Oh, that must have been
recruited my chief of staff back.
Yeah. That must have been so fun. Sorry, Juliet, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, one of the lessons of leadership that I've seen exhibited and try to channel is surrounding yourself with experts and not expecting you to know everything about everything. That's impossible. And why would you need to if there's, somebody that you can bring in that is an expert in cybersecurity? I've been in charge of IT so many times in companies, but I am not an IT expert, but I know one when I see one. So I think that has been really helpful for me. I wanted to pivot a little bit, if we can. Is that okay, Susan? I wanted to talk about your work at Markle, because you said something that I think will be really interesting for a lot of people, and that is bringing to the forefront the skills first hiring. But if you want to talk a little bit about Markle itself, but then, how you ended up in that, with that initiative, I think that would be really interesting, because I'm fascinated by it.
The Markle Foundation is an amazing 100+ year institution that has sort of delivered beyond its weight and financial resources throughout its history. I joined when I left government in 2017. I knew I wanted to continue to do something that was in the service of something. And I had seen the real value of collaboration between the public sector, the private sector, and philanthropy. And I always had a passion around issues of economic opportunity and mobility, something I got to work on with both of you, right? When we were at the United Way. Yeah. So Markle had started an initiative around workforce, and this was pretty early in 2013. Zoe Baird, who was the president of the Markle Foundation, was terrific, had brought together a really interesting coalition that was about to start a big program based in Denver, where I live, around how do you get the 60% of the American workforce that does not have a college degree to have an opportunity to contribute to the full potential of their talents, and enable companies to find the talent that they kept saying they couldn't find and need to grow their businesses. So this was one of these great win-wins and coalition building things. And I got connected to Zoe and saw in this program a real opportunity to make a difference in a way that felt very consistent with things I knew would work, right? You got to find things that people can come together on and drive things. And we started in Colorado because then Governor Hickenlooper, now Senator Hickenlooper, was passionate about this topic of skills as the currency in an economy that's changing with digital transformation or now with AI. What you learned in college is really not that relevant. It's what you learn through life and how do you bring education and learning through experience together. And so that's how I got there. And we started this program. We knew that states were a place where actually real work happened. So we started focusing on states. We started in Colorado and Indiana. COVID erupts, and we sort of morphed that program into this thing called the Rework America Alliance, which was really an attempt to build this out at much greater scale with a set of community-based labor, corporate education partners to really think about how do we redefine this problem of where does talent lie and how do we connect it to opportunity.
That's great. I really believe in that. I think that, I'm happy with my college education. I appreciate it. But I also know that there's a lot of people out there who are better because they've earned it through work and learned it through work. And I think that's where I've learned most things myself. So,
and cool. Again, we all have had to learn all sorts of things. You didn't know anything about podcasting, right?
Right.
So how do we create this labor market where you combine the ability for people to actually learn things on the job, learn things through life, and learn things through greater education? It's not one or the other. It's the right thing at the right time over a lifetime.
My daughter is teaching fourth grade now, and she's really implementing a lot of this philosophy of getting out of memorization, getting away from, the traditional learning that we all had when we were, growing up in school, and really helping them connect experience to learning. And it's really, really fascinating and just makes me hopeful, definitely.
At the risk of sounding totally like a coach wonk, education wonk, I mean, it's the growth mindset too, right? Mm-hmm. If every child and teenager and adult approaches every situation with some sort of a what can I learn here, as opposed to how can I fail or how can I not fail, it changes the game.
And in fact, a number of our initiatives, we had a whole set of initiatives about helping employers take this concept of skills and getting it done in a practical way. We had tools that Jobs for the Future now has that can, before AI was real, could write a skills-based job description for a position, because we've all had to write job descriptions and it's usually late at night, your last burst of energy, and you change as little as possible because you just want to get the darn thing done. Whereas this, you could put in the role and it would spit out a draft of a job description that focused on required skills, general skills and technical skills, preferred skills, general skills and technical skills, in a way that enabled more people to get access to that opportunity and you as a company to get access to much more talent. And we had work on the other side with career coaches, whether they were in community colleges or workforce centers or community-based organizations, to help them be better coaches, and give them more insights about labor markets and opportunity, because they don't have the capacity to become the experts on that, and to really think about how do you combine that personal touch with sort of a tech-enabled model that helps you get a person to where they really want to be. And lots of data and analytics about where those jobs are with our partners from McKinsey and the Atlanta Fed. So Sue, we had the Fed there too. So you would have been very happy about that.
So we have time for just one more question. I understand, Beth, that you left the Markle Foundation earlier this year. What are you doing now? And what are you most excited about at the moment?
So I will admit that I took some time off. So I was excited about the traveling I was doing. I am continuing to explore what I am going to do next, because I feel like I still have the energy to do something. And I feel like I've learned a lot in these experiences. Thank you guys for helping me to articulate some of those things, even to myself. But it's going to be still around the theme of, giving back and making a contribution. I want to do it in a about a cause I care about. I want to do it with people that get me excited. I want to do it in a way that I'm still going to learn something new. So I'm spending time sorting out my next step. I serve on a number of boards where I've been busy. And, you know, I live in Colorado, so I got to ski a lot last winter and spring.
That's perfect. That's great. Beth, thank you so much for being here today. I've had a blast talking to you. I'm sure Juliet can echo that.
Great. Really
It's been so fun to see you again and hear in a little bit more detail all the things you've been doing since we all worked together at United Way Bay Area. So thanks so much for being here.
My pleasure.
And with that ends another episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back in another 2 weeks with yet another episode. Thanks so much for listening. We're so glad you've joined us for this episode of Secrets of the C-Suite, the podcast. We'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please tell your friends and coworkers about us, and be sure to follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star rating if you enjoyed listening. Secrets of the C-Suite is produced by Juliet Clothier, Susan Sutherland, and Brian Clothier. Original music is by Brian Clothier, and the podcast is inspired by leaders like you.